Thanks very much. Interesting to see that the average age here is about my age, 66. And of course it's not going to be us who are affected if some of the dire consequences are going to come from our greed for growth. If they do come about, it'll be our children and grandchildren. 6 months ago I didn't think about population at all. I didn't even know SPA existed. I didn't know that Kelvin Thomson had given that wonderful address in Parliament last August. I received a phone call from my daughter who said, "Dad, you know, they're all off at Copenhagen talking about human-induced climate change. Why don't they mention the elephant in the room?" And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Population." And it's amazing, it was a eureka moment for me. I thought, well, that's logical, why don't they? I was then directed to Kelvin Thomson's web page and his YouTube copy of his speech, and then later his 14-point plan. And in those days, there was virtually no publicity on population. And I said to Kelvin Thomson, "How do you get away with this? You know, you've got this policy on population which is quite at odds with your party." And he said, "Oh, Dick, I get away with it because it gets no publicity." And so the party says nothing and they hope that Kelvin will go away. Well, we've certainly changed that in the last 4 or 5 months. And I've been working now for over 3 months on a documentary. It's a documentary for the ABC, which will be shown in August. I think it's going to be called Crowd House, or that's the working title. I've been to Melbourne, Brisbane, Canberra, the Murray Irrigation Area, the Flinders Ranges, Bangladesh and Singapore. And it's interesting because there are basically 2 issues. What population is optimum for Australia? But then most important, what's the advantages of going to a bigger population? That's normally the one that's never answered. And at the moment we have 6.7 billion people in the world. It's going to go to 9.2 billion, about 22 million in Australia. At the present growth rate, we double every 32 years or so, so that means we'd have over 50 million halfway through the century and over 100 million at the end of this century. It's interesting. I asked a man who just recently retired from the CSIRO, I said, "Look, well, my little granddaughter who could live till the end of the century, will she have enough food to eat 90 years away if we do go to 100 million? And he said, "Most unlikely." He said, "But there's never been a proper study, not in the respects of Australia anyway." He said, "No one would be game to do the study because it wouldn't be politically acceptable." Now, a lot of people claim we can only support 26 million. In fact, I've read as much as I can over the last 6 months, and it's pretty clear that for a reasonable period you could actually support hundreds or at least 100 million people. You could have 5 Dubais, if you were that mad, from Sydney to Cairns. And what would be the advantage there? I don't think there'd be a great advantage. But what we could do is mine every bit of coal we've got, use every bit of uranium we've got to desalinate water, not just to desalinate water for drinking water, but to desalinate it for crops and grow crops in glasshouses. And recently I read a book called The Bottomless Well. Now I should tell you, I'm a capitalist, of course, wealthy capitalist, and I'm ratting on my class at the moment. And, they get very worried, so they barrage me with emails, my right-wing friends. They're all people who don't believe that human-induced climate change is a fact. They're all people who believe we can just have growth forever. And one of them wrote to me and said, "Dick, all this rubbish you're talking about there being a limit on resources, have you read the book, The Bottomless Well?" I said, "No, but I've read about 30 other books." So I got the book, The Bottomless Well, and it's written by a number of scientists who say that in effect we have literally nearly 1,000 years of fossil fuels at the present rate available because of the extraordinary reserves in shale oils and in the coal tars up in Canada. Of course, there would be an incredible environmental cost in using that, but to my wealthy mates, they don't believe in global warming induced by human beings or carbon dioxide increasing our temperature, so they have no problem in using most inefficient ways of using that energy which is stored. And the reason I'm bringing this point out is that we have to be very careful in our movement if we make claims like there is going to be a limit in energy, and that means we're going to have to not be able to increase the population on this earth. What I would rather say is, look, there are extraordinary reserves of energy. People are saying we might one day invent fusion. The energy we've got in Australia, that if we went to nuclear power, is quite staggering. What I want people to say is, but why? What would be the advantages of having 5 Dubais between here and Cairns? In most cases, it would be disadvantages for normal Australians, wage earners, salary earners and retired people. For the wealthy like me, there are advantages in growth. There's no doubt about that. It's interesting, people can live for 12 months enclosed in a nuclear submarine under the water. Now, it wouldn't be a good lifestyle, but it shows what we can do if we're that stupid. In other words, we could build ourselves enclosed environments, generate oxygen as they do in a submarine under the water, and we could live in this world even if we'd done the most incredible environmental damage. But what I'm asking you to think about, why would you want to do that? You would only want to do that if there was an advantage in doing that. And I don't think there is. The other thing is that in real time, the energy that falls on the earth every day, we quite often use this word sustainable. Well, if you're looking at energy sustainability, the amount of energy that falls on this earth in a given day in real time is many tens of thousands times more than the energy we use. Now, of course, we can convert it very inefficiently. I think solar cells are currently about 22% efficient. But even if you use that inefficiency and you covered most of our deserts with solar cells, and if we somehow worked out a way of storing that energy for when the sun's not shining, what it would show once again, that we could actually fulfill the energy that we use in the input that comes in every day. But why would you want to do that? And that's what I'm going to spend the rest of my life concentrating on, and that is that human beings are very ingenious. There's an incredible amount of energy just holding one molecule together. The energy is staggering. I'd love to know where it came from in the first place. So there's energy for us to use, but I have a feeling that going to a bigger population in Australia and in the world, it's all downhill for most people. It's interesting, they say, but we get efficiencies of scale. If you increase the population, you get efficiencies of scale. You can afford bigger things. And there's a certain amount of truth in that. And I remember in the 1950s, America certainly had a higher standard of living than we did. Friends would come back and they'd show me things that I couldn't even believe would exist. But things have changed since the 1950s, of course. And if you go to the United States today, do you think, oh, they have a higher standard of living than us? No, you don't. You actually believe the opposite. Their hospitals certainly aren't as good. Their roads might have more freeways, but they're gridlocked. And I don't think there's anything in the United States that gives us an advantage. It gives it an advantage from the 15 times the population in around about the same area that we have.